Welcome to the United C Ready to Vote Community Education Tour powered by Common Cause North Carolina and our 30+ state and local partners. My name is Sailor Jones and I work with Common Cause North Carolina. I'm here today with my colleagues, Retrina Campbell, our organizing manager, and Tyler Day, our policy and research manager. From voter ID requirements to mail-in voting changes, each of our United C Ready to Vote community education events is designed to provide you with the latest to help your community or your local campuses navigate North Carolina's 2024 voting, election, and district changes. Today, we are proud to be joined, at least in spirit, by 30+ partners working hard to educate voters in all 100 North Carolina counties and show our gratitude to our invited guests at all 100 events, 100 of our hardworking local election officials, including election directors, members, and staff. How many of you have heard of Common Cause? Well, in recent years, our nonpartisan North Carolina-based team at Common Cause North Carolina has worked inside the legislature through litigation and with communities to help shape redistricting reform, protect the vote, and fight for a democracy for all. Beyond the courts and legislature, over the past year, we've traveled the length of the state many times over with our partners to help communities and their networks engage with drawing more responsive and representative districts, empower North Carolinians to bring our voices to bear in court, and most recently, to bring thousands of North Carolinians together for town halls to share the issues they care most about, including those town halls with many of the partners you see here on the screen. We call this the Unite NC movement, and today's event is a part. We believe education will be the key to overcoming barriers to voting access for our campuses and our surrounding communities, and that work begins now. So let's start by getting to know how this training can be a resource for you. Now, this 75-minute Train the Trainer model will not only provide all of you in all 100 counties across North Carolina with the latest rules for casting a ballot and what you'll see when you go to the polls, but also it'll give you a unique opportunity to ask questions of trusted election officials and easily share what you learn more broadly. We call it a Train the Trainer model because you'll receive everything we share today in a variety of formats that you can then easily provide to your networks. For example, you'll receive slides on our website that can be shown at community events. You can order booklets that can be shared in church bulletins, and a handy presenter's guide will be included in these materials that you can use word for word at your next Zoom meeting. In addition to presentation notes and resources and slides, this QR code will also get you to an FAQ that is composed entirely of questions we heard from in-person attendees all across the state at similar events. Because if they want to know the answer to these questions, it's likely you do too. And since you'll be receiving everything, just feel free to sit back, relax, and enjoy this training. As we begin, though, we want to uplift a few things we need every attendee to understand about the presentation before we get started. We are here to educate, but we're also here to better understand your needs. As mentioned, we'll be providing an FAQ with questions that you have, but please feel free to reach out to the members of the team here. We'll be providing information about how to do that at the end if you have questions. Second, we are nonpartisan. This is a nonpartisan space provided by Common Cause North Carolina to share new voting, elections, and district realities and ways to get involved. We do not represent any party or any candidate. This is a place to center people, not politics. Next, we are also centering racial justice as part of an intersectional movement that acknowledges many of the people watching this training have never truly felt a real democracy. We know barriers to our freedom to vote, constant changes to election rules, and gerrymandered districts have caused many of the racial, representative, and resource inequities in our state. And it's only that acknowledgement that will help us begin to rebuild a multiracial democracy for all North Carolinians. In short, we believe our state is better when more people can vote. Finally, we know helping your community to vote is hard work. Many of you watching are exhausted, and with good reason. Many of you have been leading voter registration drives, monitoring your local government, and educating your communities and campuses about how to cast a ballot. We're here with this training to make your work easier by demystifying voting in 2024 and providing exactly what you need to get your community ready to vote. Remember, this is a train the trainer model. Everything you see here is also available in our handy dandy booklet. We'll give you a way to order those after the main part of the training. But we want to walk folks through in our networks making a plan to vote now more than ever. So let's start by thinking about your plan to vote. If I ask you if you're ready to vote in 2024, what would you say? If I ask you where you'll be voting in 2024, do you have a plan for that? If we ask you who in your life will be joining you to vote, what would you say about that? Friends, family, maybe other folks? Throughout this event, we want you to be thinking about these important questions. We'll return to each at the conclusion of our time together just to make sure you're not only ready to check these boxes, but you're also ready to help your networks do the same. Because the 2024 elections start when? They start now. So in the meantime, what would you say if I told you your power to vote, where you'll vote, and who can vote could have shifted with new voting maps in 2024? To talk more about that, I'm going to turn it over to my friend and colleague, Tyler Day. Tyler?
Thank you, Sailor. So no matter our color, background, zip code, race, political party, and so on, almost all North Carolina voters, including about 90% of Trump voters and about 90% of Biden voters, believe we should pick our leaders and our leaders should not pick their voters. That is what redistricting is for. Every 10 years, each state redraws their congressional, U.S. House of Representatives districts, and state legislative North Carolina House and North Carolina Senate districts so that each district has a more equal number of people to give each of our votes equal weight and each of our communities equal resources. Or at least that's what's supposed to happen. In North Carolina, state legislators have the power to draw these districts, including their very own voting districts. Unlike most states, North Carolina's governor has no power to veto the districts they draw. As a result, whichever party is in control of the state legislature can gerrymander the districts. And that means that they can draw districts that favor their political party or certain politicians by using political data, that's partisan gerrymandering, or by using racial data, racial gerrymandering. These gerrymanders make it easier for lawmakers to get reelected and less likely to represent their communities and respond to their constituents. In 2023, a handful of legislative leaders once again gerrymandered our congressional and state legislative districts for their own personal gain, meaning that they cracked and packed the 2022 districts of North Carolina voters that they don't agree with to minimize their voting impact in the 2024 elections. In doing so, they drew districts of all North Carolina voters in ways that almost all North Carolinians disagree with. So why is this happening now? You may be wondering. Redistricting normally happens in years that end in 1, following a once a decade national census to recount populations across the country in years that end in 0. However, on April 28th, 2023, the North Carolina Supreme Court reversed its historic 2022 decision that had declared partisan gerrymanders unconstitutional in North Carolina. Instead, newly elected justices in Harper v. Hall supported giving legislators another chance to draw congressional and state legislative maps for partisan advantage ahead of 2024. A seat on the North Carolina Supreme Court and all seats in the North Carolina legislature are on the ballot in 2024. The result is districts that likely impact your power to vote, where you'll vote, and who you'll vote, who you have an opportunity to vote for in your congressional and state legislative districts. So let's look at the congressional map. In 2022, I should say, North Carolina was represented by proportional maps that reflected the state's partisan breakdowns. We are a purple state, and in statewide elections, they tend to be pretty close, with Democrats and Republicans receiving close to 50% of the vote. We elected representatives to the U.S. House that reflected this, with 7 Republicans and 7 Democrats in 2022. The Dave's redistricting app analysis of that map gave it a 94 proportional rating. Dave's redistricting app uses the results from recent prior elections to predict how new maps drawn by lawmakers in 2023 may perform in an actual election. According to Dave's redistricting app, the 2024 congressional map will likely result in 10 Republicans and 3 Democrats being elected, with 1 toss-up seat in the northeast part of the state, which leans slightly Democratic. And you can see that in the light blue shading there. So proportionality matters, and I mentioned that a moment ago. It is one metric that measures how fair a map is. And in a proportional map, if 50% of North Carolinians voted for Republicans to represent them in the U.S. Congress and 50% voted for Democrats to represent them in the U.S. Congress, then the map's number of leaning or Republican Democratic seats would be even. So you would get something similar to the map in 2022, which you can see on the screen received a 94 out of 100 for proportionality. And this could result in a 7-7 split, maybe a 8-6 split among North Carolina's congressional delegation. However, as you see on the right, the enacted 2024 map received a 0 out of 100 for proportionality. Truly, it couldn't have gotten worse, meaning that it is incredibly disproportionate and will greatly favor Republicans. Therefore, with the implementation of this map, a majority of North Carolinians could vote for Democrats to represent them in the U.S. Congress. However, because of how the districts are drawn, a majority of Republicans could get elected. So let's look at the state Senate map. So a party needs 30 of the 50 state Senate members to have a supermajority, giving that party the ability to override the governor's veto. According to Dave's redistricting app's analysis based on past election data, the most likely outcome of the Senate map would be 30 Republicans and 20 Democrats. If the map performs as DRA expects, Republicans would maintain their supermajority in the Senate. But of the 50 voting districts in the Senate, 9 don't favor Republicans or Democrats by more than 10 points. So, that whether or not Republicans were to maintain that supermajority is definitely in question, depending upon how those toss-up districts go. And you'll see here on the next slide some metrics showing you the Senate map, similar to the congressional map, although not quite as stark. But you can see that the 2024 Senate map received worse grades for proportionality, competitiveness, and compactness as compared to the 2022 Senate map. And so we'll move on to the State House. So the state house, a party needs 72 votes of the 120 state house members to have a supermajority, giving that party the ability to override the governor's veto. According to the Days Redistricting App analysis based on past election data, the most likely outcome of the Senate map would be 71 Republicans and 49 Democrats. And so that would put Republicans just one vote shy of maintaining their supermajority in the House, if all these districts went exactly as the analysis expects. However, there are several competitive districts that only slightly lean toward the Democrats, such as District 5, which or District 24 or District 25. These only favor Democrats by about 1 to 3 percentage points, according to the analysis. And I should note that districts 5, 24, and 25 are already represented by Republicans. Therefore, if Republicans were to maintain these three districts and win the other districts already projected to favor them, then it's certainly possible for them to maintain their supermajority or even expand their supermajority in the state house. But again, these are toss-up districts, and this is what's going to be in the balance this year. And you'll see, again, similar to the Senate, the 2024 House map received worse grades for proportionality, compactness, and competitiveness when compared to the 2022 version. So ultimately, each of these maps, the House, Senate, and Congressional, are less proportional, less compact, and less competitive than the districts that were used in 2022. So this slide has a lot of words on it to show your networks, but in the big picture, in short, legislative leaders packed and cracked urban and diverse communities. They made districts less competitive between parties, and in doing so, eroded the power of North Carolina voters to elect the candidates of their choice. While the governor cannot veto bad maps put forth by the legislature in the past, as mentioned, the courts have been a barrier to racial and before the most recent ruling, the state Supreme Court had ruled partisan gerrymandering unconstitutional. So you may be asking, can the courts help voters have more representative districts? In November of 2023, a federal judge rejected a request by litigants to speed up a racial gerrymandering lawsuit ahead of candidate filing for the 2024 elections in December 2023. The lawsuit, which will continue to move forward, concerns new North Carolina Senate election districts drawn in 2023. The judge's refusal to act in November is significant as legislative leaders seek to hold or extend their veto-proof supermajority, I should say, under the new district lines, creating time constraints that make a judicial remedy to these gerrymanders unlikely until after 2024. So all this means that we should assume that the maps drawn in 2023 are the maps that are in place for 2024. And there's only one way to overcome these gerrymanders, and that's you. And I'll turn it back over to you, Saylor.
Thank you, Tyler. And Tyler is our maps man and gave a great overview of how gerrymandered districts are impacting people all across the state. There's no one who's not gerrymandered in 2024, at least in our congressional and state legislative maps. Thank you, Tyler, for that. And the elections of 2018, the elections of 2020, and the elections of 2022 are proof positive that you are the only ones who can change and break these gerrymanders. And that's because in those 3 years, those were the highest turnout years in U.S. elections across those respective types and decades. About 2/3, 66%, of the voting eligible population across the country turned out for the 2020 presidential election. But that is the highest rate for any national election since 1900. But in 2020, North Carolinians turned out at an even higher rate, with record numbers over 75%. So it's incredible. We flooded the polls, the streets, and the airwaves in past elections to show that our communities cannot be silenced by gerrymandering. So it's time to finish the job we started by demanding the representation we so desperately deserve and by generating the voter turnout it'll take to succeed in this election at overcoming those gerrymandered districts. Experts predict even higher turnout in 2024, pushing that 80% mark for North Carolina turnout. But that doesn't mean that there won't be challenges in turning out North Carolina voters. For example, on the same day that the state Supreme Court overturned a historic ruling finding partisan gerrymandering unconstitutional, and as Tyler said, opening the door for more partisan gerrymanders on the congressional and state legislative level in 2024. On that same day, the North Carolina Supreme Court issued another ruling, CSI v. Moore, which stripped the voting rights of more than 56,000 formerly incarcerated people after they had had their freedom to vote restored for 276 days. So in this 5-2 decision, split along partisan and racial lines, the court barred these 56,000 incarcerated people from the right to register and therefore to vote in 2024. Now, if you are directly impacted by the criminal legal system and have questions about your eligibility to vote, we encourage you to contact our friends at Forward Justice. Their hotline dedicated to you is 1-877-880-VOTE. That's 1-877-880-8683 to determine your eligibility to vote in 2024. As of 2024, we're hearing from Forward Justice, 26,000 of the 56,000 people who had their right to vote stripped of them last year may now be eligible to vote. So it's never been more important. If you're in doubt, call this hotline and make sure you or your networks who may be implicated in this ruling know the latest on their eligibility to vote. Remember, state legislators do not need to gerrymander our districts. And so it's so important we get involved with an independent redistricting commission moving forward that can help. We'll provide information on how to do that in a few moments. So when does the 2024 election to push back against all these redistricting changes happen? It's happening now, with absentee ballots going out now in 2024. So let's get ready. In the absence of checks and balances, in our voting maps that Tyler just ran through, and with people being stripped of their vote, how will we fight back against these gerrymanders and against these voting changes? Well, let's show you. In the absence of the checks and balances among the three branches of government, the responsibility returns back to us, the fourth branch of government, the people. And that means turning out voters in all districts, as well as understanding that turnout could be the deciding vote, or votes in key statewide races that could provide the necessary checks and balance to gerrymandered offices. So what does that mean? That means that while the legislature did gerrymander our U.S. House of Representative maps, our state Senate maps, our state representative maps, they could not gerrymander these statewide races that have a significant impact on accessing the right to vote. For example, the governor of our state, while he can't veto the gerrymanders that we're seeing today, he can veto election bills that are used to block access to the ballot. So electing a pro-democracy governor may be on your dance card this year. The NC Supreme Court justices are on the ballot, especially one seat. They are statewide races. They are not gerrymandered. As you've seen, Supreme Court justices can or may not, depending on who the justice is, block gerrymanders and check those gerrymanders that come from the state legislature. They are on the ballot. Same with Court of Appeals. And finally, don't stop there. Down even further down ballot are races like your county commissioner. Did you know your county commissioners decide the election funding across counties? So in 2024, many of these down ballot races beyond the president, beyond Congress, are going to be even more important to you accessing the ballot in representative districts in the years to come. So today kicks off that work to get ready to vote and get your networks ready to vote with important information about rules that they'll be facing and you'll be facing when you head to the polls next year, or this year rather. So say it with us. In voter ID, it will not stop me. And we want to spend a little time talking about photo voter ID this year, since in 2024, North Carolina voters will be asked to provide a valid photo ID in order to vote in upcoming elections. For most North Carolina voters, this will mean showing what you already have in your wallet, a North Carolina driver's license. But for others who may not have that driver's license, we want to talk about those as well. A valid photo ID could mean a U.S. passport, a state-issued ID, or non-operator's ID as it's known at the DMV. It could mean a North Carolina voter ID card, free at your county board of elections, which we'll talk more about in a moment. A student ID card from a qualifying college or university. We'll talk a little bit more in a moment about what those are. An employee ID. Many government employees across the state have valid photo IDs as well. And an out-of-state driver's license. Even that can work if you register to vote in North Carolina within 90 days of the election after just moving here. Next, I want to give you a pro tip for our students. More than 100 North Carolina-based colleges and universities have photo IDs that will be accepted as valid photo IDs to vote in 2024, including many of our community colleges as well. For those that don't have those IDs or who don't have them accepted, free IDs are also available. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Also, a pro tip for seniors. It's not just young people who benefit from this particular voter ID law. Voters 65 years or older can use expired or unexpired versions of any of the IDs I just talked about, just as long as they were unexpired on your 65th birthday. Have a driver's license that's now expired but was A-OK when you turned 65, that can be accepted. For all other voters, these IDs must be unexpired or expired less than 1 year from election day to be accepted. So even folks who have expired IDs who are under 65, if it's expired less than a year, you can use that ID. Why is voter ID happening? Well, we've talked a little bit about the court cases that have driven partisan gerrymandering in the state and that have sought to disenfranchise formerly incarcerated people. Well, there are plenty of reasons why that April 28th date is important. And I'm going to talk about that just in 1 second. But I want to share that there are 3 types of IDs that you can use at the polls, whether they have an expiration date or not. That's a veteran or military ID card that's federally issued, tribal enrollment cards that are state or federally recognized, and finally, a public assistance ID card. Now, there's an asterisk beside that because there just happen to be no North Carolina public assistance IDs that have a photo. Should that change, those cards could be accepted. So why, again, is voter ID happening? Well, that April 28th date will probably be burned in my mind forever, but back in April 28, 2023, the same day as the CSI v. Moore ruling and the ruling that found partisan gerrymandering was A-OK in the state, that same new majority on the North Carolina Supreme Court reinstated the voter ID law that was struck down the year before as racially discriminatory. And so what that meant and what that means is that in that 5-2 decision down party lines, it restored the North Carolina General Assembly's photo ID requirement to vote, and it also raised the bar for proving racially discriminatory laws elsewhere. So just a reminder, the North Carolina Supreme Court and the North Carolina legislature that drew up that racist voter ID law, they're on the ballot in 2024. An important thing to remember. So this is a train the trainer model, and it's important to walk folks through what they'll see when they go to the polls, when they're asked to arrive in 2024. So when you go to the polls during the 17-day early voting period or on election day, the election official at the check-in will ask you for 4 things. They'll ask you for your last name, your first name, your residence address, and upon finding you in the registration database, the election official will ask for your photo ID. This is a situation where many County Board of Elections directors are encouraging folks to show us what you got. And in many cases, the County Board of Elections directors are concerned after the 2023 elections that people will worry, well, my photo doesn't look exactly like me, or my name doesn't exactly match what's on my registration. Don't worry about that. The election official will confirm that you bear what's called a reasonable resemblance to your photo ID. In other words, when the officials look at the photo of the ID you provide, they will decide whether the photo looks similar enough to you to confirm that you're the person in the ID. Election officials are required to bear in mind that there are many reasons a person's appearance could change. Could be a shadow in the photo. Your hair could be longer or shorter. You could be older than when you took the picture. All of these will be taken in consideration when the poll worker is looking at your ID. They'll also verify the name on the ID and make sure that it's the same or substantially equivalent. What does that mean? Well, that means if you have Mary Beth Smith on your registration, but your ID says Beth Smith, you're okay. Maybe you've got AB Sanchez on your ID, but you registered as Aaron Sanchez, totally fine. Maybe you got married and you're Maria Guzman Santana now on your ID, but you registered and you were Maria Guzman. A-okay. And you remember, it's so important to remember, your address on your photo ID need not be accurate. The ID law checks your identity, not where you live. Okay? So these are incredibly important to understand. And Ratrina, if folks have problems, where should they go?
Yes, so we want you to understand in all cases, if you have a photo ID, you can vote. If you have problems, we want you to call our nonpartisan toll-free voter hotline, 888 Our Vote, and that is 888-687-8683.
Thank you, Ratrina. And Ratrina will be popping in several times and coming back to you in just one second, but it's so important that we share that hotline with you. So if you have questions about your ID before you go to the polls, or you experience some challenges to your ID when you go to the polls, you can call this hotline in real time, get assistance, and get your vote done. Now, we really want to emphasize this slide here. It looks great in church. At your next community meeting, remind people to show us what you got. And so this is what we're asking people to run through. Ask your networks, what do you have? Encourage your networks to check their wallet, check the box for the ID they have, and bring that ID to the polls. If you don't currently have ID, it need not be a poll tax to you. Remember, there is a pro tip, and we want everybody to know it. Each county board of elections is required to provide free photo voter ID to registered voters in that county. To get your free ID, just look up your county board. It's at ccnc.me/yourBOE. And once you're there, provide your name, date of birth, and last 4 digits of your social security number, and be willing to have your photo taken at the Board of Elections. These IDs must be available to voters anytime except the period between the end of early voting and the end of election day. A voter cannot obtain a free ID between the period starting at the end of the last day of early voting, starting at 3 p.m. on that last Saturday, through the end of election day. Okay, so get your free ID ahead of time. Bring it to the polls if you've got it, and know it only takes a few minutes to get it once you've gotten your free ID from your county board of elections. There's also a QR code on this slide that allows people, maybe you're a student or you're an employee who has a photo ID, or even out-of-state IDs, wondering how they're accepted, scan this QR code, check the State Board of Elections website, and look to see if your student ID, employee ID will work. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy, as my colleagues say. Now, we want to go and let you know that there's more to it than that. Maybe you don't have an ID on the list. Maybe you can't get to the County Board of Elections to get a free ID. If any voter is unable to show photo ID, and this is important, any voter is unable to get a photo ID when voting, whether in person or by mail. We're going to talk a little bit more about the exceptions by mail. They may fill out an ID exception form when they get to the polls and still vote their ballot. The voter can choose from the following exceptions. So the voter has a reasonable impediment to showing photo ID if they lack transportation, if they have a disability or illness, if you lack the requisite birth certificate or other documents it took to get an ID, if your work or school schedule precluded you from getting an ID, you had family responsibilities, maybe you're a caretaker, you lost or had your ID stolen, your photo ID is applied for, but you haven't gotten it in the mail yet, or you're unable to attach a copy of your photo ID. We're going to talk a little bit more about that for mail-in voters. You can also write in another reason in the other section. Finally, some folks have a religious objection to having their photo taken. They have an exception to the ID law. Or we know a lot of folks out east and statewide have issues with natural disasters, hurricanes, tornadoes. If you were a victim of a natural disaster within 100 days before Election Day, you don't need an ID. That can be an exception on the form. If you've got questions, holler at us, 888-R-VOTE. We're here to help to see whether your exception applies. Now, the county boards of elections must count any provisional ballot with properly completed ID exception forms, meaning if you fill out the exception form correctly and you sign that thing, your provisional ballot should count in the 2024 election. Clear as mud? Okay. So voters that cannot qualify for any of the exceptions and cannot provide an acceptable photo ID at the time of voting will be offered a provisional ballot as well. So let's go through the 3 things that happen if you don't have an ID. So if you have an accepted ID, bring it to vote, obviously. But if you don't, there is the ID exception form. There's an example of it on the right there. Your ballot will count if you meet any exception listed on the form and you properly complete the exception form by signing. So check the box and sign. And if you don't have an accepted photo ID, you vote a provisional ballot and fill out the form. We've talked about that. Or you can vote a provisional ballot and return to the County Board of Elections with the acceptable ID you have before the county canvass the following week after Election Day. Or you can choose not to vote. Say you forgot your ID, you want to come back with it, you can return to vote with your ID later during the voting period. You can learn more about all of this at ccnc.me/voter ID. So keep in mind, please don't let a voter ID law be an impediment to you voting. Okay, there are a lot of ways you can still vote, and we've got them here for you. Sorry, this keeps going back to the 3rd slide, but these slides are all important. They look great in church. They look great at your next community group meeting, and they're all available to you. Now, let's keep going with the exception form. We've talked about the exception form for voter ID when you go to the polls and you don't have an ID. What happens if you are attempting to vote, but you don't have an ID and you want to vote absentee, aka mail in your ballot? Well, if you can't, if you want to, say you want to mail in your ballot, okay, the ID law still applies. So if you have an accepted ID and you vote from home, you need to make a photocopy of that ID. Please don't put your real ID, your actual official ID, in your mail-in ballot envelope. Instead, take a photocopy of that ID and slip it in with your mail-in ballot. But what if you can't photocopy a voter ID when voting by mail? What if you don't have a photocopier? Well, not having a photocopier and being able to photocopy your voter ID is an exception and excuse for not having ID at all. Okay, so it's very important if you are unable to attach a copy of a photo ID, for example, because you don't have a photocopy or access to one, fill out the included exception form just like you would if you went to the polls and submit it with your ballot. A photo ID is not required, by the way, for military or overseas voters who vote using special absentee voting procedures that federal law makes accessible to them. Okay. Now, one last thing to remember about mail-in voting. So during the early voting period, if you're nervous, you can mail in your ballot, but if you can also during the early voting period turn in your mail-in ballot in person at the County Board of Elections office or at any open early voting site in your county. Remember, mail-in ballots cannot be dropped off at Election Day polling locations. On Election Day, your best bet, if you're worried, the voter must return the ballot at the County Board of Elections office. So, just to recap, if you're worried about your mail-in ballot getting in on time, you can drop it off at an early voting site during the early voting period or at your County Board of Elections. If you wait until Election Day, do not drop it off at your precinct. Go to the County Board of Elections office before the end of that day. Okay, so that's the skinny on mail-in voting and mail-in voting without a photo ID or with a photo ID. So what's next? Well, Ratrina, if people have questions, what do they do?
We need you to call 888 Our Vote if you have any questions. That is 888-687-8683. After all, under the law, county boards of elections should find provisional ballots are valid unless the board has grounds to believe the affidavit is false, and a unanimous vote of county boards is required to throw out a ballot based on a false affidavit, and the board has to record the grounds for rejecting it. The local boards are not supposed to second guess why voters don't have photo IDs. As the North Carolina State Board of Elections told county boards late last year. So we're going to move into, in 2024, there will be more. Now, voting districts and a photo ID requirement won't be the only changes from the last presidential elections. State legislators who are on the ballot in 2024 passed major election changes ahead of 2024. And the time to get ready is when? It is now. Let's take a look at a sampling of changes that may impact people you know. Voting by mail. In 2023, voters' mail-in ballots must be received by the county boards of elections by 5 p.m., no later than 3 calendar days after the election. Well, in 2024, voters' mail-in ballots must be received by the county boards of elections by 7:30 p.m. on election day. New rules have made it even more vital to mail in your ballot early. To be safe, experts suggest that if possible, try to mail in your completed ballot by the start of the 17-day early voting period. Other voter challenges we have. In 2023, any voter in a precinct can challenge that precinct's absentee ballot and can file voter challenges up to the closing of the polls on election day only. In 2024, any voter in a county can challenge absentee ballots of voters in that county during early voting and election day, and can file challenges up to 5 business days after election day. Let's talk about voter privacy. In 2023, no voter assistant logs, example, a record of who helps voters. In 2023, there is no voter assistant log. In 2024, implements of voter assistant laws includes name and address of the person assisting the voter, the time they entered the poll, and the person's signature. And what we want to say is you can always use same day registration during early voting periods. Remember, voters are asked to register if it's their first time voting in the state or to re-register every time they move or need to change their voter record. That's your name, your party, etc. The regular voter registration deadline in North Carolina is 25 days before an election. But eligible voters can register and vote on the same day during our county's early voting period, but not election day. To register and vote on the same day, you must bring a photo ID to verify your identity, fill out a registration form, and 3, show one of the following documents to verify your current address. That could be a current government document showing your name and mailing address, such as a driver's license with your current mailing address, a current utility bill, a current bank statement, a current government check, a current paycheck, and or a current college university photo identification card paired with the proof of campus habitation issued by your college or university. For 2024 elections, SB 747 does also affect the process of same-day registration. To avoid problems with the new efforts to validate your same-day registration by mail, by making sure you can receive mail at that mailing address on your registration form. So any mail registration confirmation mailing does not bounce back. What are confirmation mailings and how they change under SB 747? After a person uses same-day registration, the County Board of Elections will send a first notice by non-forwardable mail to the mailing address the person provided on their same-day registration form. Under SB 747, if that single notice is returned by USPS as undeliverable before 5 p.m. on the business day before county canvass, the county board won't register the person. The person's ballot will be removed from the official count of votes. This business day before the county canvass would generally be 9 days after the election. But we also want to give you a litigation update. As of December 2023, on the efforts to challenge these changes, in October 2023, our friends at Democracy NC, the North Carolina Black Alliance, and the League of Women Voters of North Carolina challenged part of the Senate Bill 747. The plaintiffs specifically challenged provisions of the law that altered voter registration process for same-day registrants. Those who register to vote the same day that they can cast their ballots during the state's early voting period. The lawsuit is one of 2 that brings claims against an undeliverable mail provision of Senate Bill 747. The lawsuit alleges that SB 747 same-day registration provisions directly target young voters who disproportionately take advantage of same-day registration in North Carolina, and among whom voter participation has significantly increased over the past few years. We're still waiting to see the outcome of this challenge, but again, for now, please encourage your networks who are planning to use same-day registration. Make sure you can receive your mail at the mailing address on your registration form, so any confirmation notice doesn't bounce back. And I'll pass it over to Saylor.
Yeah, that's right, Ratrina. You know, we really want people to make sure that they send in their voter ID, they use their absentee right. And as Ratrina was saying, for the very popular safety net same-day registration, it's going to be so important that when you register at the polls to vote same day, you put that address in where you can receive mail. And we are really working hard in the courts. Our friends at Democracy NC and other organizations are working hard to challenge what can be a big hurdle for our students and people, other folks who move often in the state. So while they're working on this, we want to make sure that you have the latest. And so if you have questions about using same-day registration, you're concerned about it, you're looking for the alternatives, please call our voter hotline. Since the law is in flux, it may be confusing to voters. It's vital that you encourage folks to call 888-687-8683. That's 888-RVOTE. If they have questions when voting or assisting others to vote, or experience any problems when registering to vote before or at the polls. Retrina, I'll turn it back over to you.
Now, you understand, thank you, Sailor. Now you understand your new voting districts, the new voter ID law and exceptions, new SB 747 demands, and new stakes. Now it's time to make a plan to register and vote with your family and friends. Remember, this is a train the trainer model. It's important to walk your networks through what they'll see and be asked when they arrive at the polls in 2024. We also want to flag an important new voter registration form requirement. If organizations are currently registering new voters or plan to do so in 2024, if you are working with your family and friends as well, and making sure they're ready to vote as new voters, the State Board of Elections is now requiring that new registrants must complete one of the following options in box 3 on the voter registration form. 1, provide North Carolina driver's license or North Carolina DMV ID number, or 2, provide the last 4 digits of Social Security number, or 3, check the box that states they do not have a driver's license, North Carolina DMV ID number, or Social Security number. If the new registrant does not provide their North Carolina's driver's license number or the last 4 digits of their Social Security number and does not check the box stating they do not have either number, then the County Board of Elections cannot process the voter registration form. The county board will send the person a new registration form and a letter informing them that their voter registration application cannot be processed until they provide either the number or affirmatively check the box stating they do not have those numbers. That is your North Carolina driver's license or the last 4 of your Social Security number, last 4 digits of your Social Security number. If the new registrant checks the box stating they do not have a driver's license or North Carolina DMV ID number or Social Security number, then the County Board of Elections will accept the application and send the person a letter requiring them to bring have a document, which is a copy of a current utility bill, a bank statement, a government check, a paycheck, or other government document when they present to vote for the first time to confirm their name and address. This change means a person's voter registration application will no longer be accepted and processed by the County Boards of Elections if the new registrant does not provide their driver's license number or their Social Security number and fails to check the box stating they do not have these numbers. Importantly, this new requirement applies to the current voter registration form, which under box 3 only requires the new registrant's date of birth in red. Also, the current voter registration form does not instruct that the person's voter registration application will not be processed if they fail to provide the North Carolina's driver's license or the last 4 digits of the Social Security number, and check the box stating that they do not have these identification numbers. So imagine you finally registered to vote, you got your photo ID ready, and you're headed to the polls. Well, I want to also mention, going back to our voter registration form, make sure to, in the contact information, we don't want you to forget your phone number and your email, and also make sure that you have the correct document that states 2024.01, that you have the right registration form. The phone number and email will make it a little easier for our County Boards of Elections to reach out to you if there's any issues going on with your voter registration form. So want to make sure that you're putting that information as well. So you finally registered to vote, you got your photo ID ready, and you're headed to the polls. And to vote early, as always. What happens if your only early voting site is now 10, 20, 30, maybe even 45 minutes away and only open during business hours? A new law under a bill called SB 749 would strip North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper's power over the State Board of Elections and instead give that power to the legislature. Similar to legislation that was struck down as unconstitutional as recently as 2018 and soundly rejected by voters on the ballot in the same year with 61% of the vote. The law would change the composition of the county and state boards of elections, could mean big reductions in basic election decisions, like how many early voting sites options a county has, and even if they would be reduced to a single option, even in big counties like Mecklenburg and Wake. In 2023, with limited notice, legislative leaders chose to fast track Senate Bill 749. In 2024, this extreme proposal would give even more power to state lawmakers to create partisan gridlock in our elections in ways that could have devastating effects on early voting and the other vital election function. Now let's talk about how does this work. SB 749 would change the makeup of the North Carolina State Boards of Elections. This bill would establish an 8-member board with the 2 party leaders in each legislative chamber, appointing 2 members each. Under the old law, the governor appoints all the members of a 5-person board from a list provided by each party's chair. SB 749 would change the makeup of all 100 county boards of elections. This bill would establish 4-member boards with 2 party leaders in each legislative chamber, appointing 1 member each. Under the old law, the 5-person boards are appointed by the state boards of elections. So that's 4 members and the governor 1 member, which would be the chair. SB 749 would potentially lead to drastic cuts in early voting because county boards must provide approval for one-stop early voting sites. It is much more likely that an evenly partisan board will come to a tie on these decisions. Because there is no tiebreaker mechanism in the bill, in the event that the county and then the state board cannot come to an agreement, only 1 location in each county, the Board of Elections office, that will be the 1 location in each county with limited hours will be available for most popular form of voting in North Carolina. SB 749 gives lawmakers more authority over elections. This bill would permit the legislature to select the State Board of Elections chair and or executive director if the board fails to come to an agreement within 30 days of the board's selection or a vacancy. It will also permit the legislature to appoint county board chairs if a board fails to come to an agreement within 15 days of the board selection or vacancy. Let's talk about what else SB 749 will change. SB 749 changes the threshold for the State Board of Elections to order the redo of an election. SB 749 is even more dangerous because it would make it easier for the State Board of Elections to throw out election results in the future by requiring just 5 of the 8 members to vote in favor of redoing an election. Current law requires near unanimous support from 4 of the 5 members. So let's give you an update, a litigation update. Fortunately, a panel of judges in November 2023 granted Democratic Governor Roy Cooper's request to block a new elections law before voters head to the polls in 2024. The ruling from the 3 judges, 2 Republicans and 1 Democrat, was unanimous. They ruled that the law passed by the Republican-controlled legislature last month is likely an unconstitutional power grab. It's just a temporary ruling pending a full trial, likely to be held in early 2024. And likely to mean SB 749, SB 749 could be in place ahead of the general election. So in response, concerned North Carolinians like you are volunteering like never before to get to know their local election officials, attend county boards of elections meetings, and make sure their county is poised to collaborate in ways that don't mean drastic cuts to their residents' favorite way to vote. The commitment is small, but could be a huge factor in preventing long lines, frustrated voters, and limited options when people attempt to cast a ballot during the high-profile presidential elections in 2024. In addition to educating our communities and beyond on what they need to get ready to vote, we're hoping you will join us. You will join our movement to also get our counties ready to vote. Remember, this is a train the trainer model. It's important to walk folks through how they can make a difference in 2024. And that leads us to our 3 asks. A pledge today that you choose at least one opportunity to pay for what you've learned tonight and help North Carolina break voting records in 2024. The options: voter education. Share what you've learned tonight. Talk through how to, we can talk about, we will provide you with how you can order resources and take action. You can host a house party. You can use these in your faith and community, distribute resources. Also speak about this within your community. We also have ways you can engage with voter engagement. Help us reach out to voters in your county and beyond, your local groups. Common Cause can come in and work with you to talk about voter registration. We also have direct voter contact volunteering opportunities, which include phone banking and canvassing and door-to-door canvassing. And we have our elections advocacy. Advocate for better elections where you live. And that would be definitely with our county boards of election monitoring. You can volunteer to help monitor at your county boards of elections at ccnc.me/monitor. Again, that's ccnc.me/monitor. To find out the latest ways you can take action, please visit and join our action team at ccnc.me/action team. And now I'll pass it over to Saylor.
Thank you, Retrina Campbell, for all of that information about how folks can get involved with this work after this training. Again, voter education will be so important, taking this information into your communities, voter engagement, going beyond your own communities to help educate voters with the ways Common Cause is coming to your neck of the woods. And finally, as Retrina said, election advocacy and monitoring, going to your county boards of elections meetings, getting to know the current and possibly new members of your election boards and making sure that they agree on things like early voting sites to prevent the deadlock that could come from Senate Bill 749. All of this is available at ccnc.me/action team, as Retrina said. And again, if you have questions and you want to reach out to us, we are always available here at Common Cause. You can sign up for the action team, get onto our emails, and reply to us with any questions that you have from this training. We'll include them in the FAQ we provide to you here. So thank you so much for taking the time to learn more about voting, elections, and districting changes coming in 2024. Our hope is that the 75-minute train the trainer model that you have received today not only provided you with those latest rules for casting a ballot and what you'll likely see at the polls, but also gives you the resources you need in a variety of formats so that you can easily share it with your networks. As a reminder, at the link provided on this slide and the QR code that you can scan, You'll receive a recording, presentation notes, slides, an FAQ, and other relevant resources. Again, as Retrina and Tyler said, things are changing all the time. We want to make sure you have the latest. This link is the way to get it. So please be safe. Have a great day and contact us anytime with any questions or needs at 888-RVOTE. That's 888-RVOTE. Thanks so much for joining us today. We appreciate you. Good night.